Welcome to episode 51 of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. My name is William Fitzpatrick, and wow, there are quite a few changes going on right now, aren't they? Oh, good. I'm actually looking at the YouTube screen right now to see if my logo came up or not, but yes, this is the new logo. It's slightly off center, so I'll have to fix that in the next broadcast or so, but welcome, folks. I've been away for a couple of weeks, unintentionally so. I had a brief illness to deal with, another cold that affected my voice for a couple weeks. So that I had to be in a situation where I took some time off, just took the rest of the fall off, and basically went, I'll take the rest of the September off, get my voice back to 100%, and well, here we are. It's a fall card subject to change, and well, episode 51, which is the episode after episode 50, which was my 50th episode of the series, which focused on Southern Tier Wrestling's Bergman Brawl 2 event. And that was quite a fun show to do. So, this episode is going to be something a little bit different from the usual formula of Wacky World of Wrestling, but it's also not different from the usual formula of Wacky World of Wrestling in a way, because this show is going to be an introductory show for both new viewers and old viewers alike. Now, for those of you who aren't sure exactly what Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling exactly is, I'll explain it. It's a variety show wrestling podcast that basically features my thoughts and opinions on the world of professional wrestling. Keyword here is my thoughts and opinions. So mine are going to be a little bit different than what you expect from your typical wrestling proto-journalist or wrestling fan or the like. And they tend to typically be more along the lines of middle of the road neutral, when I'm not going completely wacky or sane, as I would call it, as far as my viewpoint is concerned. For example, I'm not particularly a big fan of certain things in the world of wrestling. I'm not particularly a big fan of acts that are considered hot acts at the moment, e.g., Spaghetti Hair, also known as Kenny Omega, or guys, or you'll hear me complain a little bit about why the phenomenal hobo is still in the main event scene, AJ Styles, for those of you who may not be aware who that is. And the minute somebody says something positive about Seth Rollins, admittedly, I have tried to dial down my Seth Rollins running him over with a steamroller commentary, but thankfully, Dean Ambrose likely will be the avatar that ends up making me extraordinarily happy when he ends up running Seth over with a steamroller. Some things never change. But the fall card is subject to change. A subject to change. I actually need to change the title of this. So a fall card, subject to change. It's actually based on the ideology that the card is going to change, which is the pro wrestling terminology for a wrestler not showing up at an event card. Well, this card is changing because this is a entirely new logo. I cooked it up in 5 minutes with Microsoft Paint. Simple, basic, but it gets the job done. I also have a new background logo on my main channel, the 14FITZZ Patrick channel that you are currently viewing this video on, as well as if you're looking at it from the link that I provided via Cage Side or the link that I provided via the Twitter, also known as the Bird Thing. You can follow me on Twitter at Fizzpatrick14. That's FIZZPATRICK. Considering my legendary ability to not spell things, I'm rather surprised I actually managed to get that done in one take. But, yes, Wacky World of Wrestling has undergone a lot of changes over the past series or so. From episode 39 onward, I have been on series 2 of the podcast. I announced at the start of Series 2 that there were going to be some fundamental changes happening to the podcast overall. There were some things that worked last series and other things that didn't work last series, but we were able to get some things fixed around, some changes were made, and obviously this is your introductory point for both new and old viewers alike, as I said at the start of the broadcast, for Wacky World of Wrestling. So, what exactly has been going on in the world of professional wrestling this week that I would like to cover? Let's see here. There is that Donner Party mess going on with WWE Crown Jewel. There is the main event scene, which is currently being helmed by the beloved Roman Reigns. Why, yes, I'm one of those commentators, as you might have just noticed, spitting your drink out as you just heard the words beloved and Roman Reigns in the same sentence. The Roman Empire and its fans think I'm crazy. Something that I don't necessarily deny, given the fact that I have a rather neutral opinion of their beloved god. Yes, beloved god that is Roman Reigns. I like Roman Reigns as a worker. I think he's an okay promo person. I think he's perfect for the main event scene because that's exactly what you want in a main event player. Kind of a generic goon. Main eventers are never the kind of people that are particularly flashy or exciting. Those are the kind of people that end up car crashing themselves into the main event scene via either injury or questionable booking, as we've seen many times in the past. My overall philosophy is that the main eventer should be somebody who is probably as dull as a sack of bricks and can at least stay consistent in wrestling matches and give yourself one of those fancy stars like 4 stars, 5 stars, or the occasional 6 or 7 star matches. Yeah, I'm not really a fan of star ratings, but everybody has their own different boat as to what they are going to defend in the world of professional wrestling and what they absolutely homicidally despise in the world of professional wrestling. And there really is no in between, but I hope to provide that with this particular podcast. I'm not necessarily a person that's known for selling himself particularly well, but mine tends to be relatively neutral, and I can see both sides of the coin in that particular instance. Right now, your main event scene is this, so we'll start with WWE. You have Roman Reigns, the Braun Apocalypse in the form of Braun Strowman. Then you have your secondary title feud with Seth Rollins facing Dolph Ziggler and or Drew McIntyre, and eventually, most likely, will be facing Dean Ambrose. Let's hope at this point he's facing Dean Ambrose at this point. Because I think he can actually get a really good match out of Dean, given Dean's limitations as a wrestler. Ironically, Dean Ambrose is also one of the few wrestlers that my dad likes. My dad is not very big into professional wrestling, but at least he can watch a Dean Ambrose match and go, "Oh, okay, that's it's a good match. That's a solid match." Yeah, my dad is not into professional wrestling. My mother calls professional wrestling street theater, so she is into it, but as more into the theatrical side of things than, say, me, who's into professional wrestling and actually covers this for professional wrestling podcasts. It's 12:38 a.m. as I'm recording this, and the temperatures are relatively cold outside. And there's a lot of other stuff going on. It's been raining for the last couple of days, and I like these kind of podcasts because it's a. You might have noticed over the last 5 shows or so, 5 or 10 shows, that I've mostly been going solo with these podcasts. Well, that was the original format of Wacky World of Wrestling. It started out as a solo podcast done in 15-minute segments because my voice would usually not hold out. However, with the advent of a new microphone, this Santi MP25 microphone, I've been able to deal with these podcasts a lot easier than what I would have done previously. And this microphone is just an absolute lifesaver because the last microphone I had was a old Net2 phone microphone from the early 2000s that had a problem with the headpiece where it snapped off, and I couldn't use it as a true headset. So that was a bit of a problem. And so with switching into this new microphone, I'm able to cover professional wrestling in a much more relaxed and easier time of things than it would previously. So this is sort of a little bit of a behind the scenes episode as well of how the bread is made, as I call it. The lovely, lovely bread. The bread that is basically any baker will tell you that bread making is very difficult to master. And I actually bake bread. I actually help my mother bake bread on occasion. So this will at least be less boring than what I have dubbed bread Emma, which is basically that store-bought loaf of bread that has sunglasses on it and has a shirt that says "Notice me" on it. Had to pause there for a second there to get a little bit of a drink, but there we go. So yeah, I don't really have a particularly high opinion of Emma, so that probably has made me an enemy of the nation of Australia at this point. A lot of things will probably make me an enemy of various different things overall, given the fact that I have a relatively either neutral or a neutral opinion on the world of professional wrestling, or an opinion that is so out of left field it goes into right field. So we got ourselves a main event scene that's relatively solid in WWE, continuing the subject of that, and let's see here. What else can I talk about today on the World of Wacky World of Wrestling? Let's see. Well, overall, it's actually been a relatively wacky world this year as far as 2018 in professional wrestling is concerned. I did a show on this, the A Pedestal in the Heart of Vesuvius, which was episode 48 a few episodes back, that covered the various different issues in the world of professional wrestling, particularly among the wrestling media, the wrestling personalities, and the wrestling fan groups of the four pillars of wrestling. I've talked about the four pillars of wrestling before, but for those of you who are relatively new to the show, it's this: professional wrestlers, professional media, professional wrestling personalities, and professional wrestling fans. There are into these different four pillars, and each of them basically wants to Game of Thrones the other one and wants to, well, conquer the world of professional wrestling as they see fit. And if you have been around the professional wrestling scene for any length of time or any length of any form of interactions in the scene, you probably have encountered one of these four groups, or all four of them at once. And I am not exaggerating when I say they literally want to rip each other's heads off and try to basically show themselves as the most dominant force in professional wrestling. I mean, they basically make Satan look, well, pedestrian in comparison. And Satan, for those of you who might not be aware, is Vince McMahon. That's the thing about when it comes to WWE. I like WWE because it's relatively predictable when it comes to its obviously evil tendencies. A lot of people will yell into the heavens and scream at the top of their lungs and say, WWE did this wrong, WWE did that wrong, WWE did this other thing wrong that I did not consistently conform to. I'm like, do you work for Mordor? Do you work at Stanford, Connecticut? Are you actually employed with WWE to make those sufficient changes? I mean, that's the first thing that I realized. I'm just somebody who watches professional wrestling, who has some knowledge and understanding of how this thing works because of my knowledge of theater and the musical arts and the musical arts and theater, basically. I'm in relatively no position to make any long lasting major changes in some ginormous, huge corporation that is WWE. I consider that corporate wrestling. There's corporate wrestling in that little box over there. Then you have the secondary promotions that are sort of semi corporate. You've got ROH and its obvious evil, and you've got Impact and its obvious Donner Partyisms. Although it's been much less Donner Party this year than it has in past years. Primarily because the Donner Party wrestlers who are in the Impact promotion at this point know full well that Impact is completely bonkers crazy, and they would rather not open Pandora's box upon themselves. Many a wrestler has figured this out the hard way about that promotion. I like Impact personally because Impact was actually one of the first promotions that introduced me to professional wrestling. So, yeah, I kind of have a bit of a. And since a certain head writer of TNA Impact, previously who was involved, employed in TNA, decided to be angry about everything in professional wrestling and open Pandora's box and say, this is how everything's written in professional wrestling. I'm like, okay, let me get my notepad out here and let me start scribbling down some notes. People who whine and complain about the whole exposing the business thing, guys, gals, you're not really doing anything in this particular instance to keep the business under the tarp of the circus tent, okay? Kayfabe died in like the 1990s, and I know that people are so hinged upon the fact of kayfabe returning. I feel as though that kayfabe in of itself is something that is both a positive and a negative. Positive in that you can basically go into a theatrical act, and this is how the theatrical play is going to go. The negative is that people actually start taking that kayfabe and morphing it into this whole real life thing. The reality era has been sort of this weird mutation of those two things going together. And I'm kind of like, I don't really want wrestling to return to the old school roots of kayfabe because it just screws up the wrestlers mentally so badly, having to be stuck in this little kayfabe box, which is what wrestlers complained about in the last decade. And I think that was a change for the better. Because basically what it did is that it removed power from the wrestling personalities and the people that actually organize these things, the promoters, and basically said, let us be theatrical people. Let us be street theater people, as my mother calls it. She calls it street theater. It's very involved street theater. And a lot of people will say of the ideology of, is professional wrestling art or is it professional wrestling sport? I think it's both. I don't think it necessarily is art, because in order for it to be art, you would need a pretentious artist, a mad art gallery of questionable individuals who may or may not have wanted records, and a total bucket full of crazy. Because professional wrestling has to deal with both the bad influences of the art industry and the bad influences of the music industry. So it's got both those little issues right then and there, and it is a bit of a complicated thing to go through. If a professional wrestling promotion and professional wrestlers want to consider themselves art, you know, it's you know, the level of art. The thing is that you have to realize at that point in time is that you have to deal with all of these crazy artists. And people talk about the problematics in pro wrestling. I've talked about this a couple of times on air, but realistically, the problematics are just a symptom of the problems overall. The actual cause of it is the following: drugs, alcohol, lack of sleep, inebriation via other form of something else that's happening in their life, or CTE. Okay, CTE is becoming a big issue in professional wrestling as of late because of all of the repeated head bumps to the head of the wrestlers in some cases, the extreme, excessive hardcore matches that are done in some territories, the movement away from traditional wrestling because they didn't like it because it's so traditional. You realize that wrestlers who worked traditional actually had much longer careers and much longer lives than, say, a wrestler who was wrestling in the 90s because of all of the substances that appeared, or even the 80s where all of the substances appeared. I mean, sure, there were definitely a lot of issues like physical pain, back pain, arm pain, leg pain, all the bones, broken bones, and whatnot. Professional wrestling is not an easy, and that's where the sport comes into play. If it was just art, it doesn't hurt you the same way that professional wrestling does. Art hurts you in a way of, say, for instance, getting bashed over the head with one of your own paintings by another rival artist or something. Art is if you accidentally get a paint sliver into your eye, or accidentally break your finger on a paint while painting a portrait, or your easel falling over into a riverbed. Art doesn't hurt you the same way that professional wrestling does on a physical level, and to a certain degree on a mental level, depending on how you are as a professional wrestler. See, this is why people consider it a sport as well, because it is a sporting event. It's sport theater. Feel free to steal that terminology if you want to, by the way. I'm holding no copyright over the term of sport theater. People call it sports entertainment, but I'm like, considering how many times the people complain about the so-called sports entertainment, it really isn't entertaining to them, is it? Unless, of course, the entertainment is finding ways to complain about this, which I've always been a little confused by because I've never felt like I've never taken it personally, to say the least. I've never been a person who's been particularly interested in taking things personally. If it's over a serious issue, like, say, for instance, domestic violence or sexual assault, or if there's been some other form of incident or issue, then yes, I'll take it considerably more seriously. But if it's over just a minor thing like a gimmick, a professional wrestling gimmick, will go, you do realize this is scripted, right? And that they're just playing a character. You know, I mean, there was a lot of chatter about Rusev's gimmick over the past couple of years. I was like, I was fine with it. I mean, I personally prefer character. You want character in these pro wrestling stories, but you're like, we want it nuanced. You know that professional wrestling is mainly tailored to those of the basic common denominator, right? That this is not excessively weird, trippy, advanced, you know, trippy, pretentious people who are stoned literally to the highest of the highest peaks. Theater. Where we have all these nice shiny baubles and these multi-million-dollar sets, and we're producing higher art forms in the world of professional wrestling. Look at our shiny, state-of-the-art 1080p high-definition cameras. And our stages lined with gold, diamonds, and ore as our wrestling mats have a nice, shiny, bright LED electronic logo on the sides. Did I just describe NXT in a nutshell? Because that's basically what it is. It's the bizarro interpretation of independent wrestling. I've complained about Isengard beforehand, this whole ideology of pretentiousness that it has. Not to mention the fact that their fans are literally cultists. The cult of Full Sail University. Come for the wrestling, stay for the sacrifices of the enhancement talent or those that have displeased them. I feel bad for Ethan Carter III. He's probably going to get mauled to death once again by hillbillies again, like he did the last time when he faced the Wyatt family back in the day of 2013. Oh, fun times. So, speaking of Isengard, let's get our wrestling track back on track with this particular episode and talk about the world of NXT. We talked about it in the Rise of Psycho Johnny, or I talked about it in the Rise of Psycho Johnny. Okay, so our championship scene is this: Tommaso Ciampa, Velveteen Dream, and maybe Nikki Cross, professional belt whisperer. Not counting Candice LeRae, who is basically the permanent #1 contender at this point. Yes, I'm considering Candice LeRae the #1 contender for the main belt. I mean, she's the only one of this particular band of people that actually knows how to summon a giant marshmallow cake monster, okay? I'm going to, Lacey Evans did a recent tweet of like, she's doing this 1950s patriotic gimmick that is causing a lot of people ruffled feathers, where I go, okay, it's just a gimmick. I'm not going to hold it against her if she's trying to make the main roster or such with this type of old school patriotic gimmick, which is basically the military version of Deuce and Domino's gimmick. 1950s. And she basically put out a tweet that basically said the whole classic stay in the kitchen line, which I thought, do you really want Candace to summon a giant cupcake monster? Because she's going to summon a giant cupcake monster if you keep that up. Anyway, Candice did destroy her at the last NXT episode. This last episode that was released, or the episode before that. It's a little bit hard to keep up with the NXT episodes because a lot of them really blend together lately. It's a lot of this whole storyline advancement of who attacked Aleister Black. Please tell me it's Johnny Gargano. Please, please tell me it's Johnny Gargano, because that would completely reinforce my idea that this guy is completely one of the biggest villains that NXT has ever had. No, Tommy Sports Entertainment, you're not the biggest villain here. Johnny Gargano is. And I know some of you might be in shock and saying, why do you consider Johnny a villain? Johnny is everything about the 2010 youth culture, my generation, the generation that has come into the 2010s in their 20s. I celebrated a birthday a few days ago, and I'm now 27, that I absolutely despise. These arrogant, entitled hipsters who believe that the world is theirs for the taking and that they don't have to earn anything. And Johnny Gargano is the example of that. He always whines and complains. He's basically has somehow surpassed Sami Zayn in the whining category. And it was so great when Velveteen Dream destroyed him. And he's now calling himself Johnny Failure. Well, Johnny, you did unleash a monster upon the NXT universe in the form of Tommaso Ciampa. Look, I consider him the hero of this story, but in such a way of basically showcasing the NXT universe, you are really being entitled here. You were picking his partner. You were picking Tommaso Ciampa's replacement partner for Johnny Gargano after Ciampa got injured. Okay, the minute that you hear that Ciampa gets injured, you literally try to replace him with somebody else. How crazy is that? And basically what I consider Ciampa's run is that he is basically a babyface in the NXT territory and heel everywhere else. Because NXT is NXT and it is a literal cult that will drive you insane. Or sap out your life essence so that Triple H may continue to wrestle. That's basically my other theory, is that basically they have a giant golden altar of Triple H and that they sacrifice people to actually continue his life essence energy. That's why he's been wrestling on so many pay-per-views this year. Yes, I know that that's a horrifying reaction, but remember, Hulk Hogan did absorb the life essences of Hulkamaniacs everywhere just to continue his career into wrestling. It's why the Attitude Era fans happened, because they lost all of their happiness in the 1980s and became jaded, bitter smarks who wear all black and have all profanity-related t-shirts. Yes, I blame Hulkamania, because Hulkamania is literally an eldritch abomination absorbing the souls and happiness of children. Yes, it's powered by the Forsaken Child. It's one of my long-standing theories that every time I talk about it with people, they don't disagree with that. They don't disagree with that particular theory, which I've always found as amusing. So yeah, NXT. It's kind of in a tough spot right now because your champion is Ciampa, but how much longer is he going to keep going? How many times are you going to keep smoke and mirroring him in this situation? And before anybody says, please take Cody Rhodes to NXT, let me launch them out of a trebuchet when they say that. I think Cody's staying with New Japan. That's the other big thing that's going on right now, is this whole being the elite storyline that's been developing. Kenny Omega, Cody Rhodes, the Young Bucks, Hangman Page are all have their contracts due at the start of January with New Japan. And there's a possibility that all of them or some of them might be heading to WWE. So, who would be the best fit in NXT? Well, I would actually say this. I think that you would catapult Omega and the Bucks to WWE. Now, Omega might be the hardest sell of the bunch because he's had past issues with WWE, in particular, one of their former trainers, Bill DeMont. He might take WWE because of he might get actually more creative freedom than he's currently getting with New Japan. And New Japan is starting to change rather radically because of a new president in the form of Harold Menji. He's got a new group of people in charge, and they're starting to make some massive changes. They brought over Shingo Takashi from Dragon's Gate, who became a freelancer, and he's now the newest member of Los Ingobernables de Japan. Okay. So, yeah. So you have in this situation, you have these groups of individuals, and okay, let's see here. Oh, my microphone was fluctuating a little bit there. Hang on for a second. So I appear to have somebody in the chat said the word profanity. Yeah, this is not a profanity-driven podcast. I hate to say it. If I did say something profane, please note in the timestamp as to when that happened. But yeah, we have the Bucks and Omega. I think the Bucks might head to WWE just for possibly a slightly easier schedule with NXT, because it seems to me that NXT is catering to indie wrestlers who might want a reduced schedule and might want to just stick it with that particular schedule instead of just something involving main roster WWE. Because the thing is, people forget about main roster WWE is that they have schedules that are tailored for certain wrestlers. Legends wrestlers, they wrestle a limited schedule. Part-timers wrestle a limited schedule. And now the main eventers are also kind of working a more limited schedule as far as the scheduling is concerned. I know that people will say, oh, look at the data and the statistics, which, by the way, I would suggest go follow WrestleNomics Radio, because they're the guys that really have hammered down the data points for all the wrestlers and their schedules. And they've done a comprehensive study list. And a lot of wrestlers, the sub-tier main event guys are the guys that are working the most. The upper card main event guys, they're working in mixed tag matches, they're working in tag team matches. They're not really working singles matches, or if they are, they're working them in like special events or special regional events, which has been kind of the focus of WWE this year, is to really try to make a world wrestling product, which has been their goal for the last 10 years, but an international wrestling project for the last 10 years or so. And a lot of people will say, well, they should just focus on the homegrown area. The thing is that there really isn't a lot more that they could develop in the United States. Sure, there's a lot of other areas that they could be able to do so with, but again, that takes a lot of time. And it also would also require the regional markets in those areas to recover their professional wrestling market. Because there's a common misconception I've noticed about WWE, that it is this diabolical evil entity. That part is true. It's a diabolical evil entity that will consume the souls of anybody that stares at it. But then again, the thing is that these various different areas and territories will blame WWE solely for their failures, instead of looking at the area's promotions in the past and asking themselves what went wrong. Crockett Promotions is responsible for its own failings. They didn't have any infrastructure. They overspent way too much money trying to compete with Vince and company. And that was incredibly silly. Right now you have a situation where New Japan, they seem to be interested in expanding just into the California market, which explains why the California wrestling market is down this year in compared to past years. In past years, the California market was usually one of the top 3 territories that was making the most news headlines. This year has been a lot more quiet, especially after the legendary feud of Super Dragon versus Technology, when they accidentally oversold a bunch of tickets for a PWG event. And because of the fact that PayPal introduced a new policy where charges could be filed by PayPal because of the fact that you might have broken a few of their policies, they decided to hold the event at a bigger venue. In addition, Reseda has been possibly getting a renovation change, which means that PWG might be getting out of Reseda finally and into the Globe Theater in Los Angeles. Oh, those poor street buggers are going to have to deal with professional wrestling fans who are more psychotic than actually them. I know that they say that it's apparently in a bad area of town, but I just feel bad for all the questionable ruffians and muggers and all sorts of those people, because they're going to have to deal with pro wrestling guerrilla fans. They're going to flee the minute that they see them in their luchador mask and lack of common sense. As they just did a 450 moonsault off the top of a car and broke both their legs. So yeah, you have the Bucks and Omega. I'm not sure if Omega goes to WWE, more so, it's a possibility, especially if he feels like his creative freedom is being limited, which I really hope his creative freedom is being limited, because Omega literally nearly caused a PR disaster for them for their Florida Gamer event when he failed to check 2 minutes, 2 to 5 minutes, 2 clicks on a phone with good Wi-Fi, the National Sex Offender Registry to make sure that a sex offender wasn't working on the show, and somebody who has charges of domestic violence on them. 2 different wrestlers. Great. Wonderful. I mean that sarcastically, by the way. Just what in the literal heck was he thinking in that instance? And that's still something that boggles my mind, especially when they just gave you the IWGP Heavyweight Championship. I really hope that old man Tanahashi rips him limb from limb. Yeah, Hiroshi Tanahashi is going to be challenging Kenny Omega. And there is every single hope in my brain that he beats him. Old man Tanahashi and his hatred of DDT pro wrestlers. That is something cool there. Then you have the Bucks. Catapult them into a trebuchet, land them in NXT, have them terrorize NXT for a few years. They've already got the Undisputed Era. They basically have got every single hipster wrestling act imaginable conglomerated in one place. Full Sail University in Florida. Come for the wrestling, stay for the sacrifices to our holy Lord Triple H. Yes, shovel. See, here's the thing. Vince is obviously evil. Hunter tries to hide his evil at times with acts of goodwill, of all goodwill towards men, women, children, and anybody who is a fan of the WWE Universe. I bring you thy cruiserweights. I bring you thy lady wrestlers. I bring you thy lady wrestlers tournament of death. And therefore, I am God. He's now become a god of the so-called smarks, and you might have noticed something here. I don't typically call anybody either a mark or a smark when it comes to professional wrestling. I call them instead intellectual. Because an intellectual basically removes all of the stigmatism of mark and smark, and it doesn't twist it around so that you have all of these sorts of weird things that happen. Well, they say, oh, I'm not a mark, I'm a smark. All that kind of stuff. Besides the fact that people don't seem to understand what the word mark means. Mark means, in carny terminology, somebody getting conned by someone else, and they don't know it. A smark implies that you actually know that you're being directly conned, but you don't want to do anything about it. Whereas, I consider myself an intellectual of wrestling. I consider anybody who talks about wrestling an intellectual, and in this particular format. And intellectuals have a bit of a higher standard when it comes to talking about professional wrestling. And that basically corrects the bad behavior of a Mark or a Smark or Clark or whatever you call yourself. Because that's the biggest thing, is that professional wrestling is a big act. It's theater. And everybody gets involved and everybody gets into theater. Professional wrestling personality, as I've talked about in the past, is basically the modern interpretation of a carnival barker. The kind of person that says, hurry, 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 come see our NXT showcase match where we put our matches against the endless UK champion, Pete Dunne, versus guy with very little charisma, Ricky O'Shea, and some guy calls himself Adam Cole, baby. An actual infant would be a better wrestler than Adam Cole at this point. But then again, Adam Cole is being outclassed in wrestling by both Britt Baker and every single person in his stable, the Undisputed Era. Admittedly, they do need their Seth Rollins replacement when Seth inevitably injures his leg again. But again, another guy that's kind of generic long hair. So, thankfully, they've realized the error of their ways with Cassius Ohno and have decided to turn him into the gatekeeper that kills everything with his elbow. That is relatively enjoyable, and apparently he's also going to be facing Matt Riddle at some point. He wants a match with Matt Riddle. He wants to face Matt Riddle. Bro's gonna get his wish sooner rather than later. So yeah, in the traditional wacky world of wrestling, this is basically a grab bag episode of randomness, which is fitting of this subject to change card. But when you look at this from this perspective, this is a very interesting time in the world of wrestling. So anyway, talking about Cody Rhodes and Hangman Page. I think Hangman Page might sign with WWE depending on his status with Ring of Honor. Although they've already signed Punishment Martinez from ROH. Cody, I think, staying with New Japan. I don't think he has any reason to realistically go to WWE at this point. He's having a lot of fun on the Indies. He's having a lot of fun in New Japan, and I think he's business savvy enough to know that these all-in shows are going to be something that he can build on, that he can actually build a base around and promote. I mean, he's already proven he's a better promoter than his dad was. His dad somehow managed to sync two wrestling promotions and territories, the southeastern states and the and WCW for a time, NWA WCW with those dusty finish things. So I think it's going to be a split contest. I think the Bucks might go to WWE. I think Omega might be a guy that goes to WWE if his creative freedom is being limited. And Cody and Hangman Page might go to WWE, but I think Cody stays with New Japan. I think he has no reason to go anywhere else, and he's already just starting his run with the 10 pound of gold, which is the NWA title. So makes perfect sense for him to stay with those companies. So what exactly do I think is WWE's planning at this point? I think at this point they're basically planning the rematch of Roman Reigns versus Brock Lesnar number 6. Yes, they've already had a number of matches already, but Brock Lesnar is going to be facing Roman Reigns at some point, maybe at WrestleMania 35 it was. What is it? WrestleMania 35? We're already at WrestleMania 35. And because of the fact that it's an even number WrestleMania, there's going to be more of an emphasis on the celebrity show. And it seems like every wrestling promotion in existence is trying to cash in on the fact that it's back at New York, New Jersey, because of the fact that every wrestling event at this point is now scheduled in and around New York City. There's going to be so much wrestling that you could literally hear a pin drop and it would basically be, oh, was that a bell? Was that a sounding bell? I mean, I don't know exactly what the plan is for regional promotions, but if I'm around WrestleMania weekend, I would either book a week before WrestleMania or I would book a week after WrestleMania because everybody's going to be busy WrestleMania week, or as I call it, Maniac Week. I think if anybody from Bullet Club, okay, PW Fan 202 says, I think if anyone from Bullet Club leaves, it's most likely is Heyman Page. He's young enough to become a major long-term star for them, unlike the Bucks or Omega. I think that's a good point, but Hangman is a guy that kind of is in an interesting position right now. He could benefit a lot from the fact that ROH has a injured reserve list at this point that is basically the equivalent of, say, for instance, the Atlanta Falcons defensive lineup. And that might be viable for him to stay around ROH for at least maybe another year or two to see if he can actually get a main event push. Because let's look at what we have as far as ROH's roster at this point. They have an over-the-hill Jay Lethal. They have a Dalton Castle that has had back issues over the last year. They just lost Punishment Martinez, who, while might not necessarily be the biggest player for them, was a guy that they could use in their mid-card. And they're relying on the Bucks and Omega. So if anybody is going to get a big contract from ROH, it might be Hangman Page. And it depends entirely on what they're going to do. And it also depends entirely on what New Japan's going to do because they've got Jay White now on their side. So maybe they have Hangman Page as a backup in case Jay White gets injured. I mean, the thing you got to remember about the youth is that sometimes the youth works out for you and sometimes the youth completely backfires. And I'm not sure with Hangman Page yet. I think he's a solid enough talent, but there's a lot of question marks right now. He certainly is getting a lot of good promo time with the Bucks, and they're definitely ironing out the holes in his game. But we'll have to see from here. I think he's one of those guys. I think he'll go with WWE, but I think it will probably just be a 2-year stay with them. If I was him, I would probably just sign a 2-year contract. Try the waters around NXT, initial contract. Then, if I feel like it, sign a longer term deal. So let's see here. We have So we have all those promotions running around WrestleMania weekend. BXW just announced a show in New York around the time of WrestleMania weekend. Everybody's announcing shows around that time frame, which is kind of cool to see them doing ahead of time. WWE really hasn't done much announcing for WrestleMania yet, which is a little weird because usually they do a lot of advance announcing around this time period of October. But not this time, apparently. I mean, this year has been definitely a year for WWE to step more into the international waters and try to promote as a global wrestling promotion at this point. They just did their Super Showdown Slowdown show in Australia. And they've got the Awkward Arranged Marriage show, which may or may not be happening. That in of itself is a whole other vein of awkward. I'm just like, I mean, here's the thing. A lot of people have weighed in on the whole issues with Saudi Arabia. My personal take on it is this. It's an awkward arranged marriage of 11 years between these two companies. And I am loving every second of it because, like, guys, you signed a contract with WWE. Do you know how many times WWE has a tendency to screw up even the most surefire thing in existence? And you decide that, oh, we're going to have a greatest Royal Rumble in our area. And then they pull this, and then they summon Arya Davari to wave the Iranian flag to generate heat for a cruiserweight match. Oops. So that's what happened last time. I mean, it's an awkward situation, which is just made even more awkward by the alleged allegations that apparently the Saudis might have killed a journalist. I'm not sure. It was at a Turkey. It was an embassy in Turkey. We'll have to see where more information comes out about this one. But it's like, WWE and the KSA are kind of in this one-upsmanship game as to who can do something more insane with this relationship. And now WWE is in a situation where they're basically being told by the US government that we might want you to postpone your event at this point. So yes, it's awkward, but again, it's WWE. It's prototypical of what they can do in this situation, or what they usually do in those situations. It's not like, and the same thing almost happened in Australia. You had also this. They filled the stadium. They had an Undertaker, Kane, and versus DX match, or did they actually have that match, or do they have? Are they having? Oh wait, they just had a singles match between Triple H and the Undertaker. That's right. I actually remember that main event. It only went 15 minutes. Actually, it was relatively short for an Undertaker Triple H main event. It didn't take like 2 hours and 50 minutes. But yeah, it's like, it's a whole other vein of awkward onto this whole arranged marriage affair. And it's like, I'm just, you really can't do anything about it at this point. Sit back, grab some popcorn, and enjoy the absolute fireworks of Vince being the uncle at the wedding party that just accidentally set off the fireworks into the catering table. I mean, it's just awkward. It's an awkward situation between both parties who I think at this point both of them didn't really it's like a marriage in Las Vegas. Both parties had no idea what they were getting themselves into. And now that they're in a relationship with one another, they're both like, well, this is awkward. So the best thing you can do in this situation, since there really isn't anything any one of us can do, is just sit back, relax, enjoy the fireworks. This is one of those few times where I basically will say that. Just sit back, relax, enjoy the fireworks. Because Lord knows both sides in this situation, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and WWE at this point, are basically staring at each other going, oh God, what now? What now? Oh Allah, what now? Oh, what art thou foul? So, you know, I know that might not necessarily be the response that a lot of folks are looking for, but that's just basically how I look at it. I look at it like that. I go, and now there's a possibility the Crown Jewel might be canceled. Well, if anything, it's like the equivalent of somebody opening King Tut's tomb. This event is cursed. The Greatest Royal Rumble was cursed. This is cursed. This is every single Arabian curse being unleashed out of a genie's bottle into a professional wrestling event. And you remember the for those of you who might not be aware, do you know of the troubled production of the film Lawrence of Arabia? This is reminding me of the filming of Lawrence of Arabia, where there were so many issues. It was basically in that time period the Apocalypse Now of film productions. Apocalypse Now may be the main film that you think about when you think of troubled productions, but Lawrence of Arabia was the 1959 film. That was a film that had a ton of troubled productions about it. Go read the TV Troops page on it, is what I'll say. This is basically the equivalent of that. So you have that awkward situation. You have this World Cup tournament that may or may not have to move locations at this point. Basically, the World Cup tournament is King of the Ring, isn't it? Well, we all know what happened to the last person that won the King of the Ring tournament. He ended up in Dragon's Gate. Yes, Elfo is back in professional wrestling, and he's back with his home promotion, Dragon's Gate. That would be Neville, for those of you who might not be aware. He's back to consume the one... Do Dragon's Gate still use that multi-belt gimmick format for opening the belts? I'm not sure. I don't really watch much of Dragon's Gate because Dragon's Gate is a promotion that has had a lot of decline in recent years. Same things happened to Evolve. Yeah, a lot of people are saying that this is a golden era of wrestling, and I kind of don't buy that. I go, it's a golden era if you think that there's a lot of variety, but a lot of these indie promotions are actually using the same wrestlers. Where's the regional development? Where's the actual, territories or such? And people will say, territories are dead. I'm like, no, territories aren't dead. Just because it doesn't have NWA in the name doesn't mean that the territory is dead. It's one of those situations where it depends on the area. The Midwest might be a total tire fire, but there's a lot of young talent there. The New England territory might be eldritch abominations of wrestlers who look the same, but again, it's got some good areas. It's got Limitless up in Maine, which is like the one bizarro promotion of the bunch, in that it's actually a professionally run promotion of professional wrestling. I actually managed to do some alliteration there. Neat. But yeah, you have all those little things right then and there. And what I like about these random shows is that I can just jump from one topic to the next. I mean, 5 minutes ago, we were talking about the awkwardness of one of the world's most awkward arranged marriages ever in the form of WWE's relationship with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And now we're talking about independent wrestling. There are some areas that are doing some really good jobs of rebuilding. Western New York, for example, has done a very good job of rebuilding with young talent and with a combination of young talent and veteran workers who can still go. Other areas are starting to really get in on the act. Georgia's actually becoming a territory that's becoming relatively solid. If they can get their organizational issues and structure problems and kick a couple of promoters out of the region, they'd be okay. Mid-Atlantic's doing okay. They haven't shot themselves in the foot recently. I mean, I'm just waiting to hear the headlines for Nova Pro, for instance, doing something Donner Party-ish. And then there was, of course, CWF Mid-Atlantic, which did shoot itself in the foot in the start of the year, but justifiably so. One of their commentators got arrested, not arrested, got allegations of harassment and other things happened to him. Which admittedly Nova Pro then hired that guy, but oh boy. Donner Party nonsense. For those of you who might not be aware of what the Donner Party means, the Donner Party is in reference to the famous Californian Donner Party that ended up eating some of their members' feet off because of cannibalism. The Donner Party in professional wrestling is whenever you have an incident or a bizarre thing or accidental injury or something else that happens that just turns things into a complete horror show. Admittedly, it's kind of fitting given the fact that it's October and Halloween season is out and about, but yeah, it's been a relatively interesting roughshod year in the world of professional wrestling. There's a lot of ups, there's a lot of downs, and there's a lot of stuff that's in between. And this is a full card subject to change at this point because it's now 1:26 a.m. in the morning. I've been doing this since what was it? 12:30 actually. So I've actually got a couple more minutes to fill. Is anybody still in the chat at this point? Question mark. Two watching right now. Do you have any questions that you want asked in this particular segment? I probably should have asked questions in that situation. Um, Overall, I'm actually feeling relative. Oh, yes, yes, you do. You have some questions? Because I PW fan too. Is that you, Adam? Just to clarify here. Mhm. Let's see here. So you got questions? I'm more than free to answer them. Okay. Yep. Okay, Adam Rice. Coolness, man. Okay, you got some questions? Well, free to ask them in the chat because I'm actually looking at the chat right now. Sometimes I don't look at the chat when I do these broadcasts, primarily because I look at this from an audiovisual format. And oftentimes I'm looking at some other things. Also, I got this weird buzzing noise coming out of my earpiece here. I'm not sure if that's showing up on the final broadcast or not, but yeah, feel free to ask some questions there, Adam. And I'll keep talking because I don't really like a lot of dead air time on my broadcasts that I do these shows on. Are you looking forward to anything from SmackDown 1000? Is somebody going to throw a pin at the hot air balloon known as The Rock and launch him? Watch as his body flies across the entirety of the arena like an air balloon, like a deflating hot air balloon. Uh, let's see. Is the Great Khali going to be making an appearance on SmackDown 1000 so that he may chokeslam Rey Mysterio and his reincarnated knees? Is Rey Mysterio going to be making an appearance at SmackDown 1000 and dazing us with his genetically engineered robo knees? Lefty and righty, who have both asked for $50,000 pay raises at this point. No, yes, Rey Mysterio is a kind of there's Rey Mysterio, and then you have to ask the contracts for Rey Mysterio's knees, who both have different things going on. There's some stuff I'm looking forward to the SmackDown 1000. Rey supposedly full-time now? Well, I mean, he was a part of one of the matches I actually enjoyed, which was John Cena versus Rey Mysterio for the WWE Championship that happened on Raw back in 2011, I think it was. 2011, 2012. It happened in July, I think it was. And I caught the last 15 minutes of that match, and I hadn't watched a Raw in full at all. And that's actually the first time had watched a Raw. That was the last time I watched a Raw partially. The next week after that, I actually watched a full-length episode of WWE Raw at that time. So that was a good, proper introduction into Monday Night Raw, because the last several times I attempted to watch Monday Night Raw, you want to know what the first time I watched Monday Night Raw was? I think I've said this story before, but Michael Cole being knighted by the Queen of England. I wanted to watch the Westminster Dog Show, for those of you in the context. No, I actually wanted to watch the Westminster Dog Show. Willingly wanted to watch the Westminster Dog Show. So, to answer, like you said, to answer your question, I am actually looking forward to anything from SmackDown 1000 because you never know with SmackDown. They have had a consistently decent show over the last few years. There have been some ebbs and there have been some flows, but I feel overall that they're doing a good thing. So now let me ask you a question in the comments there, Adam. How do you like the new logos? Because I actually have an updated logo on my main channel at this point as well. I actually have one of those headliner photos for it. These are just basic MS Paint logos, but I feel that they work relatively well with the show. um, you know, it does kind of fit the vibe of a fall card is going to just subject to change. I like it. Simple is good. Oh, good, man. Because there's gonna be some. Because these are relatively simple to make. It takes like about 5 to 20 minutes, and I'm probably going to be making a variety of title cards. I mean, it doesn't have like the panache and professionalism of like a Shooting the Breeze title card or any of the other podcasts, but I like the simplicity, and it's something that I made on my own. So it's like, I mean, the thing is, when it comes to this podcast, a lot of people will say that they've spent a large amount of money on expensive equipment and whatnot, but here's the grand total of the cost so far for Wacky World. $0. I got my headset free because I paid for it via a gift card on Amazon. The title card I spent like 5 to 20 minutes coming up with on here, and I don't get charged with Google Hangouts. So it's like $0 for everything on this podcast. But the only thing that isn't cheap is, of course, the actual production quality, which is on the audio side of things. The audio is the most important part of this particular podcast. And I just figured out what was hissing in the background. It was actually this soda was in my background. The audio levels of the podcast I've always preferred audio over video when it comes to doing podcasting. And I feel like that's the most important thing. There might be the occasional sound, like me accidentally breathing into the microphone. But overall, the audio quality has been the most important thing that I've tried to improve upon on this particular show. And this is like, for those of you who have never seen this show or are now going to be introduced to this show, this is your introductory point. This is a random show. There was a few random jokes. There were a couple random gags. There were a couple of random topics that were thrown into this blender of a wrestling podcast. And, well, I've covered about an hour's worth of wrestling, and I think that we'll sign out for this particular edition of the show. Oh, that's right. I actually have a couple of announcements to make. Well, first and foremost, obviously, you've seen the new logos that I'm coming up with. I'm going to be coming up with a couple of different title cards and a couple of different fonts for this particular podcast. The orange font is going to be something I'm probably going to be going with for the next couple of weeks here, before switching back to a blue font that I've got in mind, as well as a couple of other fonts. Yeah, that's the first big change, is the original logos. Instead of just going with whatever avatar that I have on my app at that point in time. The next big change is this. At the start of the year, at the episode A Dangerous Quiet Before the Storm, I announced that I was going to be possibly picking a co-host for the end of the year at the start of Series 3 in January. Well, take a look at the title screen. Fall card subject to change. Well, the card has changed slightly. See, because of the fact that I've done these solo podcasts and I've greatly enjoyed them, and I've actually gotten a lot of feedback from some people who have been very happy with the solo shows, I've decided to go back to my old classic format. Well, basically, episode 43 was the start of a new era, unintentionally so, but it's a return to the classic format. There is going to be likely is not going to be any co-host to start Series 3. And we'll just continue on with the solo podcast at this point. I am in absolutely no rush at this point to grab a co-host from any other podcast. And that the solo shows have been quality enough with the small amount of viewership that they get, that I feel that I'm going to continue on going with the solo shows for the foreseeable future. I am going to be bringing guests on the show eventually. This is not like it's going to be a permanent change or anything like that. I just feel at this point in time that these solo shows, the quality of the solo shows, and me sort of returning to my personality. Because doing all of these collective podcasts over the past couple of years, the one thing I did realize is I noticed that my individuality in these podcasts was kind of drifting away. Either I was acting as a moderator for a group of people, or I was in a group of people that I realized that my own personality was kind of shifting away, and I was just sort of kind of becoming a little bit generic, as odd as that is to say. These solo podcasts have sort of given me my voice back. It's weird to say. It's weird to say that, that my voice has sort of come back doing these shows. And I've only done 13 shows so far this year, and that's going to change relatively quickly here. But I feel that the overall quality of the shows this year has been relatively good. Series 1 has some great shows. Series 2 has had some great shows too. The classic editions from 2013 all the way back. A lot of people will tell you that they're embarrassed about their original stuff, or that they don't like their original stuff. I love my original stuff because it actually has a lot of good quality to it, considering the bog standard limited equipment that I had, as well as the 15-minute limit upload times that you had back in the day. I hope you folks have enjoyed this introduction into the world of Wacky World of Professional Wrestling. There's going to be quite a bit more wacky to come, but two big announcements were new logo for Wacky World of Wrestling. I know that it's off-centered on the Hangouts thing, but I'm probably going to be changing that in post-production. And the second thing is that I'm going to be remaining and continuing to do these solo podcasts for the foreseeable future. I don't have a permanent co-host in mind for any of this. I'm not interested at this point in grabbing a permanent co-host. I will occasionally be having guests on the show from time to time. So, with that in mind, I'm going to wrap this show up. Thank you so much for watching this edition of Fizzy Wacky World of Wrestling. Thank you for watching the 50th episode of Wacky World of Wrestling and my coverage of STW's Bergman Brawl 2 show, and any other shows that you have watched of Wacky World of Wrestling over the past several years. This has been very much a hobby project for me over the years as I've talked about professional wrestling. I am not a person that is professionally trained in radio. I am self-taught. And these are quite enjoyable for me to do when I just go off the cuff and just start talking about what is going on in the world. I celebrated a 27th birthday a couple weeks ago on the 21st of September. And, I'm kind of at right now, sort of at a crossroads right now. And this is the first of really showcasing what new path I'm going to be going on so far as Wacky World of Wrestling. Thank you so much for tuning in on this edition of Fizzy Wacky World of Wrestling. Next up is episode 52, which will be yet another random episode, because there's always random topics that I may have missed. There's feuds I may have missed. There are wrestlers I failed to talk about. I barely talked about the modern day Terry Funk versus Ric Flair feud in the form of Charlotte versus Becky, which that's exactly what it is at this point. And anything else that comes to mind. I probably will be doing another episode that will focus on some questions. Another Q&A episode. I think Shooting the Breeze did one a couple weeks ago. Probably will do one for Wacky World. But until then, folks, have a good night at this point, because it's 1:39 a.m. in the morning, and good day if you're watching this in the daytime, whenever. Have a good day or night, folks, and I will see you next time for the next edition of Fizzy's Wacky World of Wrestling. I've been away for 4 weeks, and I've got some catching up to do on the podcast front. Episode 52 will be the next one up, but episode 51 is in the books. See you, folks. Bye.